Hey there, Geometry. Thanks for tuning in today. We're going to look at lesson 2.1, conditional statements. There's a lot of writing in this, so what I figured is I would use the typing method in Google Slides to help go through this. That way you can kind of fill in the blanks and we can move through this a little bit quicker. So first thing we're going to talk about is what is a conditional statement. This is the first thing that we're going to write down in our fill in the blanks. A conditional statement is a logical statement that has two parts. And with that two parts, we have a hypothesis and a conclusion. So when that conditional statement is written the if-then form, if would be the hypothesis and then would be the conclusion portion. So for example, we have if P, then Q. So P would just be representative of an idea, and then Q would then conclude it. You can also use symbols P, arrow, and then Q, which just means P implies Q. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to use red to identify hypotheses here and blue to identify the conclusion. Then we will rewrite the conditional statement in if-then form. So first off, birds, that is going to be your hypothesis. And then feathers would be the conclusion. So if we were to write this in if-then form, it would say if an animal is a bird, then it has feathers. Okay. The next part, you are in Texas. That part is your hypothesis. You are in Houston. It is your considered to be your conclusion. Sorry, I'm losing my words here. So if you are in Texas, right, if you are in Houston, then you are in Texas. And I think I actually flipped those things around. Okay. Next, we have if x is greater than 5, x would be greater than 3. So for that one, we just want to make sure we know which one is the red hypothesis and which one is the blue conclusion. For this one, the hypothesis we're thinking of is that x would be greater than 3. So that would be your red hypothesis, and blue would be your conclusion. X is greater than 5. Okay, so how we would write this in a statement, we would say if x is greater than 3, then x is greater than 5. So sometimes your hypothesis and conclusion can be swapped around. It just kind of depends on what mathematically makes sense. We're going to do this again with the second part. It says all members of the soccer team have a practice today. So the hypothesis would be members of the soccer team. So this one would be highlighted or drawn in red. And then having practice today is going to be considered blue, your conclusion, because you have to be a member of the soccer team first in order to have practice today. So to write your if-then statement, if a person is a member of the soccer team, then they have practice today. Okay. Whoa. All right. The next one, all 30-degree angles are acute angles. So thinking about the first part, if your hypothesis would be a 30-degree angle, so this would be your red, and your conclusion of that would have to be, then it has to be acute. So if an angle is 30 degrees, then it is acute. Okay. The last one, 2x plus 7 equals 1 because x is equal to -3. We're actually going to start with the solution here. X is equal to -3. That is your hypothesis because 2x plus 7 has to be equal to 1. That would be your conclusion. Oops. So in order to type that in the if-then statement, we would just say, I don't want this to be in a different color. If x is equal to -3, then 2x plus 7 equals 1. Okay, So with that, you kind of work backwards with what did you get as your solution? That's going to help you find your conclusion. Solution and conclusion are rhymes. That's how I remember it in math terms. The next thing we're going to talk about is a negation. A negation of a statement is when you have the opposite of the original statement. One way you could say that, you could say not this or not that. And a symbol just means there's a little squiggly line in front of it. That just means not P. I don't think you have the symbol written down, so make sure you have that drawn in your notes before we go on to the next slide. So what we're going to do is write the negation of each statement. The ball is red. You would just say the ball is not red. Or the cat is not black. The negation of that sentence would then just be, you wouldn't say the cat is not black. Again, that would just be a grammatical error. You would just say the cat is black. Okay. Next up we're going to look at is converse, inverse, and then contrapositive. So a converse is when you exchange the hypothesis and the conclusion. And we'll talk about what that looks like in a second. So you started with P then Q, well, converse would just be Q then P. Sometimes that's true, sometimes not, so we'll talk about the differences in those. The inverse is when you negate both the hypothesis and the conclusion. If not P, then not Q will happen. So if today is not Friday, that means tomorrow is not Saturday. And then a contrapositive is when you switch the inverse entirely. So when you exchange the hypothesis and the conclusion, and then you negate both of those, that is how you get a contrapositive. So if today is not Saturday, then yesterday was not Friday. That would be an example of a contrapositive. Okay, so those three terms should be filled in: converse, inverse, and contrapositive. And then we'll go ahead and start talking about how to make those true. So it says, let P be you are a guitar player, and let Q be you are a musician. And so what we're going to do is try to write the conditional statement, determine if it's true or false, then the converse of that, the inverse of that, and then the contrapositive of that. So the conditional statement would need to be, if you are a guitar player, then you are a musician. This is true because in order to be a musician, you play a musical instrument or you do something musical with your life, right? Okay. The converse of this says, if you are a musician, then you are a guitar player. This is false because not all musicians are guitar players. The inverse of this, if you are not a guitar player, you are not a musician. This is technically false as well because sometimes you can be other things and still be a musician. Like I play the flute or I play the drums. Those are different things and you're still a musician. And then contrapositive is just the inverse written backwards. If you are not a musician, then you are not a guitar player. This is true because if you're not a musician, then you're not playing the guitar, right? So those are what those simple words mean. Let's see if you can try this one. This one's very interesting. It says, let P be you are not dead and let Q be you are alive. Write each statement in words, then decide whether it is true or false. So we start off with P to Q means if you are not dead, then you are alive. This is true. The converse of that statement would be, if you are alive, then you are not dead. This is also true. The inverse of this, now we have to be careful with how we word this because remember, two nots would make it go away. So if you are not dead, which means if you are dead, then you are not alive. This is true. And then this next one, the contrapositive, if you are not alive, then you are dead. This one is also true. So sometimes all of your statements would be true, but then other times, like what we saw with the musician practice question, some of those are true, some of those are false. Okay. Onward to this next part, it says, decide whether each statement about the diagram is true, and then explain your answer using the definitions you have learned. I'm going to insert a text box here and just start writing our answers with that. So the first one says line AC is perpendicular to line BD. This is true because there is a right angle mark. Okay. The next one, angle AEB and angle CEB are a linear pair. These are true because with that, you have to have adjacent angles with ray EA and ray EC as opposite rays. So that means they're linear. And then EA and EB are opposite rays. This one is false. They don't go in opposite directions. Okay. To our next section, it says use the diagram, decide whether the statement is true. Explain your answer using the definitions that you have learned. So again, this is just using contrapositive or positive statements to decide that. Let's start with question number 6. Angle JMF and FMG are supplementary. So JMF and FMG are, so we're going to say true. They are a linear pair, and it appears they are making a straight line. Okay. Question 7. Point M is the midpoint of FH. This is false because there are not any marks that make FM equivalent to MH. So we don't know if FM is bigger than MH or vice versa. Question number 8. Angle JMF and angle HMG are vertical angles. These are true. They share a vertex and fit the definition of opposite angles. Cannot spell. Opposite angles. The last one, question 9, is line segment FH perpendicular to JG? This is false. In order to be perpendicular, you have to show an indication of 90-degree angles, so there's no indication of 90-degree angles. Okay, that is the final piece of our notes for today. Thanks so much for tuning in to this, I would say, not normal lesson of me writing and showing notes. So a lot of this was just a bunch of writing. So thanks for hanging in there, and we will catch you next time.